and now esteemed members of the Galactic Defense Council Drone Council speaker, Vex, their tentacles drooping with the distinctive boredom of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. We move to item 47 on our agenda. The annual review of member species' military capabilities. Captain Brick Johnson slouched deeper into his chair in the human delegations booth, wondering for the 1000th time why Earth had sent him a field officer with all the diplomatic grace of a caffeinated rhinoceros to represent humanity at this glorified science fair. The massive amphitheater of New Geneva Station housed representatives from over 200 species, most of whom were about to spend the next few hours bragging about their latest ways to turn matter into energy and energy into bigger explosions. First presentation. The Velian Confederation Vex announced, managing to sound simultaneously important and half-asleep ambassador. Petring practically bounced to the central platform, his iridescent scales gleaming under the spotlights. The Velian adjusted his designer spacesuit, which probably cost more than Brick's yearly salary, and flashed what he probably thought was a winning smile. It looked more like a shark trying to sell you cryptocurrency, my fellow sentients. Petring began, his voice dripping with the same tone used by every tech startup CEO Brick had ever wanted to punch. What if I told you we disrupted the very concept of defensive capabilities? Brick mouthed, along with the word disrupted having won that square on his Galactic Council buzzword bingo card. Behold the Petring Personal Defense Suite Mark 7. The Vexian held up what looked like a fancy watch. This revolutionary quantum entangled energy matrix projects a defense field capable of dissipating any energy-based attack, while simultaneously charging our next generation plasma weapons for the perfect counter strike. The audience CED appreciatively. Brick struggled not to roll his eyes. These demonstrations always went the same way. Everyone showed off increasingly complex ways to shoot light at each other while looking down their various appendages at humanity's continued use of primitive kinetic weapons. But surely Patron continued looking directly at the human section with what could only be described as weaponized smugness. Some of our newer members might benefit from seeing this in action. Captain Johnson, perhaps you'd like to test our latest defense system with your— He paused for dramatic effect. Ballistic weapons. The chamber erupted in poorly concealed laughter as Zener, and 3 rows down, actually fell out of their hoverchair. Brick stood up, straightening his uniform. He'd been through this song and dance before. Ambassador Petring, with all due respect, I don't think— Oh, come now, Captain, surely you're not afraid to demonstrate your species' charming reliance on throwing little pieces of metal very fast. I assure you, my personal shield can handle it. More laughter. Even Vex's tentacles curled in amusement. Fine. Brick sighed, drawing his standard issue sidearm. Standard safety protocols in effect, of course. Petring waved dismissively. The demonstration area is fully contained, though I hardly think we'll need it for such antiquated technology. Brick took aim at the smirking ambassador, who stood with his arm spread wide, the shield device gleaming on his wrist. The familiar weight of the pistol was comforting after hours of watching people shoot various colors of light at each other. Whenever you're ready, Captain, show us what your species considers cutting-edge defense technology. Brick couldn't help but smile slightly. Ambas, I should mention that humanity doesn't actually consider this cutting edge. This is just what we give to officers who spend most of their time doing paperwork. He pulled the trigger. The result was exactly what Brick expected. The shield flared to life, a beautiful display of quantum engineering, doing exactly what it was designed to do: dissipate energy. Attacks. The bullet being decidedly unenergetic until it hit something, passed right through, and pinged harmlessly off the demonstration area's containment field. Behind Petring, the ambassador's smug expression hadn't quite caught up to events when Brick holstered his weapon. And that, ladies, gentlemen, and various others, is why humans still use projectile weapons. Meeting minutes can show that. I warned him. The chamber was silent for approximately 3 seconds before erupting into chaos. Vex's tentacle shot up in alarm. 3 different species started demanding technical explanations, and Petring, well, Petring just stood there looking like someone had just explained cryptocurrency to him. Brick sat back down, pulled out his data pad, and marked off chaos erupts during weapons demonstration on his bingo card. Some days he really loved his job. Vex was still trying to restore order when Professor Blur burst into the chamber, their gelatinous form jiggling with excitement or possibly fear. It was always hard to tell with no archaeologists especially the amorphous ones. Stop everything. Blur's translation module squeaked pitch. Rising with each syllable, you're all in terrible danger. The chaos actually increased, which Brick hadn't thought possible. Vex's tentacles were now tied in what appeared to be a quantum knot. Professor Blur Vex managed attempting to untangle themselves. This is a closed session of the Defense Council. How did you even get in here? I solved the engravings. Blur continued, either not hearing or choosing to ignore the question. Their translucent form had turned a concerning shade of MVE. The ancients weren't destroyed by a natural disaster, they were invaded. This actually got everyone's attention, even Petring, who had been quietly trying to pretend he hadn't just been embarrassed in front of the entire council. The precursor civilization, someone asked. The one that disappeared 50,000 years ago. Yes. Blur oozed their way to the central platform, leaving a slight trail of anxiety. Sweat gel. My team just finished decoding the warning messages in the ruins on Epsilon 6. They were trying to tell us something about their destroyers. The professor's form rippled as they interfaced with the chamber's holographic system. Ancient symbols filled the air, spinning slowly. We've been translating it wrong for centuries. These aren't religious symbols. They're technical speifications. Look. Blur's surface rippled with academic excitement. This isn't a prayer to their gods, it's a warning about something called kinetic penetrators. Brick sat up straighter. Something about that term tickled his tactical training. The precursors had energy shields too. Blur continued their translation module, barely keeping up with their enthusiasm. More advanced than anything we have today. But these invaders, they used weapons that completely ignored them, weapons that threw dense materials at significant velocities. You mean like the primitive projectile weapons that just penetrated my supposedly impenetrable shield? Petring asked, his scales shifting to a distinctly queasy shade of green. Exactly. Blur's form practically vibrated. The precursors had grown so dependent on energy-based weapons and defenses that when these invaders appeared with their primitive kinetic weapons, they were completely defenseless. The chamber erupted in nervous murmuring. Brick noticed several representatives giving the human section concerned looks. Oh, come on. A Zoran representative called out. You expect us to believe that one of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history was defeated by what throwing rocks really fast? Actually, Brick found himself standing again. That's a pretty effective strategy. Energy shields are great against energy weapons. But mass is mass. If something's moving fast enough, it doesn't matter how much energy you can dissipate. Thank you. Captain Vex sighed. But I hardly think they were interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Max Rodriguez, who burst through the same doors Blur had used, looking like someone who just run several kilometers in full gravity. Captain Rodriguez gasped. We've got a situation. Long-range sensors just picked up an unknown fleet entering the galaxy. They are not responding to any standard hails. And their ships, they paused, catching their breath. Their ships don't match any known configuration in our database. Let me guess, Brick said, looking at blobs still spinning ancient symbols. Their ships are unusually dense for their size, with minimal energy signatures. Yes, sir. How did you just? A lucky guess. Lieutenant RCK turned to address the now silent chamber. Speaking Vex, I suggest we move up item 47 on the agenda, emergency response protocols. And maybe we should have Professor Blur stay. Something tells me we're going to want an archaeologist's perspective on what happens next. I think, Petring said quietly, his scales now a particularly interesting shade of panic. That, for once, I agree with the human. Brick smiled grimly. Well, folks, looks like we're about to have a practical demonstration of why humanity never gave up on projectile weapons. Lieutenant Rodriguez, tell the armory to break out the rail guns. All of them. Rodriguez's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. All of them, sir, all of them. Lieutenant, something tells me we're going to need a lot of things that go very fast in one direction. As the chamber descended into renewed chaos, Brick couldn't help but notice that ancient civilization destroyed by mysterious invaders wasn't on his bingo card. He'd have to fix that for next year's summit, assuming, of course, there was a next year's summit. The emergency session of the Defense Council had been running for 6 hours, which was about 5 hours and 55 minutes longer than Brick's patience usually lasted. The mysterious fleet had parked itself just outside the or cloud of a nearby star system, doing absolutely nothing, except being extremely concerning. Perhaps Petring suggested for approximately the 7th time we should attempt peaceful contact again. My new quantum harmonics translator is certified for over 7 million dialects. Your translator already tried that. Brick reminded him. They responded by sending back what Professor Bloor assures me is the mathematical equivalent of a middle finger. Bloor, who had been obsessively comparing the unknown ship's design to their ancient records, wobbled enthusiastically. The similarity to precursor records is uncanny. The mass readings, the energy signatures, even the way they're deliberately positioning themselves just outside our effective weapons range. About that, Rodriguez interrupted, having spent the last few hours practically vibrating with unused trigger finger energy. I've been running some calculations. Their ships might be outside the range of standard energy weapons, but our latest rail gun design's absolutely not. Petring scales flushed crimson. We are not going to start an interstellar incident by shooting primitive projectiles at an unknown civilization, even if they are the same civilization that might have wiped out the precursors. Brick asked mildly. We don't know that for certain. Vex interjected, their tentacles wrapped around what appeared to be their fifth cup of stimulant juice. And even if they are, that was 50,000 years ago perhaps. They've evolved beyond such violence. As if on cue, the chamber's main display lit up with an incoming transmission. The unknown ships were moving well. Brick muttered, looks like we're about to find out the fleet's movement was wrong somehow. Their ships didn't so much fly as they did fall in very specific directions using gravity itself as their primary propulsion. It was elegant in a terrifying sort of way. They're charging weapons, Rodriguez announced, their TAC iCal display lighting up like a Christmas tree, having an anxiety attack. Energy readings are wait. That can't be right. Let me guess, Brick said, watching the displays. No energy readings at all. Exactly. It's like they not. Oh, Rodriguez's face went through several interesting expressions as realization dawned. They're using kinetics, aren't they? Really big kinetics. The first shot from the alien fleet proved this hypothesis is correct. A chunk of refined metal roughly the size of a small office building screamed through space at a significant fraction of light speed, passing straight through 3 layers of the most advanced energy shielding the galaxy had to offer before reducing an uninhabited monitoring station to very excited atoms. The council chamber exploded into panic. Vex's tentacles tied themselves into what might have been a new form of geometric proof. Petring scales had gone through so many colors they were now displaying shades that shouldn't technically exist, just like the records showed. Blop was practically bouncing off the walls, their gelatinous form vibrating with academic excitement that seemed inappropriate for the situation. The precursor accounts talked about weapons that ignored their strongest defenses. This is incredible. We're all going to die. But the historical significance, we are not going to die, Brick interrupted, having reached that special kind of calm that only comes from everything going spectacularly wrong. Lieutenant Rodriguez, remember those rail gun calculations you were working on? Rodriguez's grin should have been classified as a weapon of mass destruction. Yes, sir. I took the liberty of having the crew load our experimental super heavy penetrators. They're not as fast as the alien rounds, but with the new magnetic acceleration coils. Lieutenant Sir, less talking, more shooting. Yes, sir. The next few minutes were educational for everyone involved. The alien fleet, apparently expecting their targets to be as helpless as the precursors had arranged themselves in a textbook perfect attack formation. This would have been an excellent strategy against energy weapons, against the barrage of hyper-accelerated tungsten rods that Rodriguez enthusiastically introduced to their shields. It was somewhat less effective. The aliens' return fire was devastating, but predictable. They clearly hadn't fought anyone with equivalent weapons in a very long time. Their shots were precise, powerful, and completely unable to deal with targets that simply weren't where they were aiming. Rodriguez's cry of triumph echoed through the chamber as another alien vessel sprouted a tungsten-shaped hole. That's what you get for showing up to a kinetic fight with last millennium's tactics, whose primitive now. Lieutenant Brick admonished, please maintain professional decorum while committing acts of extreme violence. Sorry, sir, I meant to say target neutralized with extreme prejudice. So the alien fleet, having apparently decided that this was not at all how this encounter was supposed to go, began to retreat. Their ships fell away into gravity wells with the same unsettling grace they'd arrived with, leaving behind several disabled vessels and a lot of very confused galactic representatives. Well, Vex said, Stunned silence, their tentacles slowly unnodding. I believe this emergency session has been informative indeed. Petring agreed, his scales finally settling on a shade, best described as embarrassed acceptance. Perhaps we should revisit our previous discussions about the relative merits of various weapons technologies. Fantastic idea, Brick said, watching Rodriguez lovingly pat the tactical display. But first, maybe we should talk about what we're going to do when they come back. Because trust me, they're going to come back. What makes you so sure? Vex asked. Because Brick smiled grimly. If there's one thing humans know about, it's the psychology of people who show up with overwhelming force, expecting an easy fight when they don't get it. They tend to take it personally. How long do you think we have? Petring asked, his scale shifting to a worried move. Long enough to start mass-producing rail guns, Rodriguez suggested hopefully. Lieutenant, sorry, sir, long enough to begin a measured and appropriate military response to a clear and present danger, Sir. Brick sighed. It was going to be a long week, but at least he had finally filled out his bingo card. The emergency rearmament session of the Defense Council was going about as well as you'd expect for a group trying to completely redesign their military doctrine in less than a day, which is to say it was a disaster wrapped in a catastrophe and tied with a bow of pure chaos. What do you mean you can't just add guns to everything? Petring demanded, waving a technical diagram that might have been a weapon design or possibly a very angry coffee maker. Isn't that what humans do? Brick pinched the bridge of his nose. No, that's not. Look, you can't just strap a rail gun to your existing ships and expect it to work. The recoil alone would tear them apart. You need to build the entire structure around recoil. The Zenton representatives translator nearly shorted out. What do you mean? Recoil weapons aren't supposed to push back. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, Rodriguez quoted cheerfully, still riding the high of their earlier battle. Basic physics. Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a Lieutenant. Brick warned. Sorry, sir. Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a gun in space. Sir Vex's tentacles had developed a concerning twitch. Are you telling us we need to completely redesign our entire fleet? That's impossible. The cost alone is less than the cost of extinction. Blur interrupted, their gelatinous form now surrounded by hovering displays of ancient battle records. The precursor records are clear. Once these invaders find a vulnerable system, they don't stop until there's nothing left but our energy weapons. Petring began, are very pretty lights that their shields completely ignore. Brick finished. Look, humanity went through this same debate centuries ago. Yes, energy weapons are clean, efficient, and elegant, but sometimes you just need to throw a really dense object really fast at something you really don't like. That's barbaric, someone shouted from the back. No, Brick corrected, that's physics, and physics doesn't care about elegant solutions. It cares about mass times acceleration. Rodriguez, who had been unusually quiet for someone whose entire personality could be summed up as guns are neat, suddenly perked up. Sir, I have an idea. The entire chamber collectively held its breath. Rodriguez's ideas were typically effective, but tended to end with large explosions and larger property damage reports. We can't rebuild the entire fleet in time, Rodriguez continued, practically ing. But what if we didn't have to? What if we just built really big guns and put them on space stations like the old coastal defense batteries on Earth? But for solar systems, the chamber went quiet. Even Vex's tentacles stopped twitching. That's Brick started. Brilliant, Blore interrupted, their form rippling with excitement. The precursors never tried fixed positions. Their entire defense doctrine was based on mobile energy weapons. Fixed kinetic batteries would be completely outside their tactical experience, and the invaders are using their tactics. Petring realized, his scale shifting to the particular shade of green that meant his brain was actually working instead of just taking up space. They're expecting us to fight like the precursors did. Exactly. Rodriguez was now practically vibrating. We build a network of fixed defense platforms, big ones with really big guns. They'll be expecting mobile ships with energy weapons, not stationary fortresses designed to throw chunks of metal at significant portions of light speed. The engineering requirements would be immense. Vex mused, their tentacles slowly unknotting the power needed to accelerate. Projectiles of sufficient mass already solved, Brick said, pulling up some files on his data pad. Humanity's been working on theoretical designs for system defense platforms for centuries. We just never built them because, well, everyone kept telling us kinetic weapons were primitive And now primitive is exactly what we need, Petring, said, his scales flushing with embarrassment. I don't suppose you'd be willing to share those designs. Brick smiled. It wasn't entirely a nice smile. Of course, that's what allies are for, though I should warn you, Lieutenant Rodriguez here will probably want to assist with the construction process. Rodriguez's grin threatened to escape the normal boundaries of their face. Just think of all the possibilities we could build: layered fields of fire, interlocking kill zones, synchronized barrage patterns. It'll be beautiful, Lieutenant. Sorry, sir. It will be a professionally executed defensive strategy, incorporating multiple redundant layers of protection. Sir Vex's tentacles had developed a new twist that probably meant they were getting a headache. I'll convene an emergency funding session, Professor Blur. We'll need your historical data to justify the expenditure. Ambassador Petring, can your people handle the manufacturing? If we provide the designs, the Velian Confederation would be honored to demonstrate our manufacturing capabilities in support of this innovative defensive strategy, Petring said, managing to make it sound almost like a prepared statement. Good. Brick nodded. Because they're definitely coming back, and next time, they're going to be ready for mobile rail gun platforms. But fixed defenses, that's going to be a nasty surprise. How long do you think we have? Vex asked. Brick looked at the tactical displays, still showing the trajectory of the alien fleet's retreat. Long enough to build something interesting, Lieutenant. I believe you have some designs to share with our allies. Rodriguez's expression suggested that several birthdays and holidays had all arrived at once. Oh yes, sir. I have so many ideas that Petring muttered, his scowl shifting to a worried purple. Is exactly what concerns me. Don't worry, Brick assured him. This is probably going to work. And if it doesn't, he paused, considering the odds. Well, at least the explosions will be spectacular. That's not actually reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. Now let's go build some really big guns. 3 months of frantic construction later, Brick stood in the new Geneva Station's command center, watching the largest network of kinetic kill vehicles ever assembled spring to life. The defensive grid looked like a ballet of potential violence, each platform moving with precise grace as it tracked its assigned sectors. It's beautiful, Rodriguez whispered, wiping away what might have been a tear. Like a symphony of synchronized destruction. Lieutenant, sorry, sir. Like a professionally coordinated network of defensive installation, Sir Petring, whose scales had been stuck in a sort of nervous MVE for the past week, checked his displays for the 100th time. Are we sure they're coming back? Perhaps they decided we weren't worth the trouble. As if on cue, the long-range sensors lit up like a disco. Having an existential crisis, you had to ask. Brick sighed. Professor BL, what are we looking at? The gelatinous xenoarchaeologist rippled with academic excitement. The formation matches the precursor records exactly. They are using the same attack pattern that worked 50,000 years ago. How unfortunate for them. Rodriguez grinned. Should I begin targeting calculations? Sir, not yet, Lieutenant. Let's see if they've learned anything from last time. Brick turned to Vex, who had given up on unknotting their tentacles and now looked like a living quantum probability diagram. Speaker, should we try talking to them first? Protocol suggests, Vex began, but was interrupted by the nearest display screen, suddenly showing what appeared to be a mathematical proof. If mathematical proofs could swear, well, Petring observed, his scale shifting to a sort of resigned yellow. I suppose that answers that question. Indeed. Brick nodded to Rodriguez. Lieutenant, show them why humans have a saying about bringing knives to gunfights. What followed was perhaps the most one-sided space battle in galactic history. The alien fleet, apparently operating on tactical doctrine that hadn't been updated since before most species discovered fire, flew directly into the carefully planned killing field with all the grace of a drunk penguin at a formal dinner party. The first salvo from the defense platforms reduced 3 of their largest ships to rapidly expanding clouds of very surprised atoms. The second salvo caught them trying to adjust their form and removed the entire center of their fleet. By the third salvo, they seemed to be having serious second thoughts about this whole invasion thing. Ha! Rodriguez's cry of triumph echoed through the command center. That's what happens when you don't update your tactical doctrine for 50,000 years. How do you like our primitive weapons now, Lieutenant? Sorry, sir. The enemy is experiencing rapid unplanned disassembly due to contact with superior defensive Preparations so the alien fleet's response was chaotic, their remaining ships scattered in all directions, apparently abandoning any pretense of coordination. Several of them tried to return fire, but their targeting solutions were clearly based on fighting energy weapon platforms against the fixed defense stations, which had been deliberately designed with all the subtle grace of a brick. To the face, their shots might as well have been stern suggestions, their retreating again pettering. Observed his scales now showing a complex pattern that might have been relief mixed with smugness. And much faster this time, of course, they are Bloor wobbled excitedly. They've just encountered something completely outside their experience in 50,000 years. Nobody has ever fought back like this, nobody had to brick. Shrugged, everyone was too busy trying to be advanced to remember that sometimes the old ways work just fine. Speaking of old ways, Rodriguez interrupted. Still grinning like someone who'd just been told they could keep all the guns, several of their disabled ships are intact enough to study. Should we organize recovery teams? Absolutely not. Vex's tentacles somehow manage to look stern. Protocol for first contact situations clearly states that we should carefully study potential threats to galactic civilization. Brick finished. Besides, I think Lieutenant Rodriguez would literally explode if we didn't let them examine the alien ships. I would not. Rodriguez protested then, after a pause, though I might have to submit my resignation for entirely unrelated reasons. See, we can't have that. Think of the paperwork. Vex's tentacles did something that in some species might have been an eye roll. Fine. But I wanted on record that I objected to this flagrant violation of first contact protocols. Noted. Brick agreed. Now, let's go see what sort of interesting technology our new friends left behind. Lieutenant, try to contain your enthusiasm to professional levels. Rodriguez, who was practically vibrating with barely contained glee, managed a somewhat steady salute. Yes, sir, I will maintain appropriate decorum while examining the fascinating alien weapon systems. And if something explodes, I promise, it will be entirely for research purposes. That's not actually reassuring. Wasn't meant to be, sir. Brick sighed. It was going to be an interesting debriefing session. But at least they'd finally proven why humanity had never given up on the simple joy of throwing things very fast at problems that needed solving. Sometimes the old ways really were the best ways. And if they were very lucky, maybe the aliens would come back again. After all, they still had a lot of interesting new gun designs. To test the post-victory session of the Defense Council was considerably more relaxed than previous meetings, mainly because it's hard to maintain proper diplomatic decorum when you've just watched 50,000 years of tactical superiority get thoroughly dismantled by what the galaxy had previously considered obsolete technology. To summarize the preliminary findings, Petring announced his scales, now displaying a complex pattern that somehow managed to combine smugness with embarrassment. Examination of the disabled alien vessels has confirmed Professor Blur's translations. These were indeed the same species that destroyed the precursor civilization, or being the operative word. Rodriguez muttered, earning a sharp look from Brick. The technical analysis is interesting. Petring continued carefully, not looking at the human section. Their entire civilization appears to have developed along purely B'istic lines, without ever discovering energy weapons. Their shields were specifically designed to counter the precursor's energy-based technology, which explains why they were so ineffective against our newer defenses. You mean why they got their shiny metal backsides handed to them by primitive weapons? Rodriguez whispered this time. Brick didn't bother with the look. Vex's tentacles had finally unnoted enough to form recognizable shapes again. The diplomatic implications are concerning. We now have confirmation of a hostile elder species that may return with updated tactics. Oh, they'll definitely be back. Brick nodded. But next time, they'll be expecting kinetic weapons, which is why Lieutenant Rodriguez has been working on some interesting new designs. Lieutenant Rodriguez's grin should have come with a warning label. Well, since you asked, they pulled up a holographic display that looked like someone had asked a hyperactive child to design a Death Star. I call it the Mark II Defense Grid. C. We take the existing platforms and add rotating magnetic acceleration coils that can. Brick let the technical explanation wash over him, noting with amusement how the various council members' expressions shifted from horror to fascination and back again. Even petering scales couldn't seem to decide what color they should be. In conclusion, Rodriguez finished approximately 20 minutes later By combining traditional human kinetic weapon designs with Velian manufacturing techniques and Zenton power systems, we can create a defensive network that can throw significantly more mass at significantly higher velocities with significantly better accuracy. And by significantly, the lieutenant means enough to possibly violate several laws of physics. Brick. Translated, though I'm still not sure about the rotating sections, the rotation adds style, Sir Lieutenant. Sorry. So the rotation provides enhanced tactical flexibility through multiple overlapping fields of fire. Sir Blur, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly rippled with excitement. This is fascinating. We're witnessing the birth of an entirely new school of military doctrine, the integration of so-called primitive technology with advanced engineering principles. Future archaeologists will study this moment for centuries, assuming we survive long enough to have future archaeologists. Vex noted dry. The cost of implementing these designs across all member systems is less than the cost of extinction. Petring finished his scales finally. Settling on a determined blue, the Velian Confederation pledges its full industrial capacity to this project. Other representatives quickly followed suit, probably less out of genuine enthusiasm and more out of not wanting to be the only ones without massive gun platforms when the aliens inevitably returned. Well, then, Brick smiled. I guess humanity is officially in the weapons consulting business. Lieutenant Rodriguez, try to contain your excitement to professional levels. Rodriguez, who looked like they might actually achieve liftoff through sheer joy, managed a mostly steady salute. Yes, sir, I will maintain appropriate decor while revolutionizing the entire galaxy's approach to defensive technology. Though I can't promise there won't be explosions. There are always explosions with you, Lieutenant. Thank you, sir. I do try. Vex's tentacles had developed a new twist that probably meant they were developing a migraine, I suppose. This means next year's defense summit will be interesting. Oh yes, Brick agreed, watching Rodriguez enthusiastically explain something involving tungsten rods and magnetic acceleration to an increasingly worried-looking Petring. Though we might want to update the bingo cards. Something tells me ancient hostile species returns and galaxy-wide military doctrine revolution are going to be common squares from now on. That's not actually reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. Now who wants to see the lieutenant's designs for something they're calling the Super Heavy Antimatter Assisted Kinetic Kill Vehicle? I'm told the presentation includes practical demonstrations. The resulting chaos was, Brick had to admit, quite spectacular, almost as spectacular as the look on Petring's face when Rodriguez started explaining the concept of nuclear pulse propulsion. Some days, he really loved his job, and somewhere in the depths of space, racing away from their humiliating defeat, the aliens were probably having some very interesting discussions about the dangers of assuming that primitive technology meant the same thing as ineffective RCK. Almost felt sorry for them, almost. And after all, they really should have known better. There's a reason humans were the only species that never gave up on throwing rocks really fast at their problems. Sometimes the old ways really are the best ways, especially when those old ways involve rail guns.